To lead our discussion today, I'd like to introduce you to the session moderator, Maria Kafalis. Maria is an author, advocate, and philanthropist. She is the founder of the Calliope Joy Foundation and Cure MLD, and her work as a patient advocate has been featured by CBS Sunday Morning with Jane Pauley and the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative. Maria was recognized with a 2018 Nord Rare Impact Award. Her latest book, Harnessing Grief, A Mother's Quest for Meaning and Miracles, chronicles her personal journey from grief to advocacy for gene therapy. She has spoken at the NIH and the FDA and advises policymakers, industry leaders, and regulators about the promise of gene therapy to treat rare diseases. I want to thank you all for joining us today, and now I will turn it over to Maria to get the conversation started.
Thank you for that wonderful introduction. Today, I'm going to be talking to two very talented, remarkable mom advocates, and we are going to be discussing grief in many different forms. And I'm going to begin by introducing my panelists, and then we're going to sort of run this as a conversation. So I hope that people who are listening can offer their questions and reactions, and we will keep this conversation going even after this recorded conversation now. So my first panelist is Julie Kim. Julie Kim writes about motherhood and her experiences raising a disabled child in an ableist world. In 2018, her daughter Izzy was diagnosed with a rare genetic deletion, resulting in an unknown range of health issues and intellectual and physical disabilities. Julie's essays on ambiguous grief, a concept she has really written about and thought about deeply, have been featured in The Atlantic, Cup of Joe, and The Cut. She currently lives in Oakland, California, but will soon relocate to New York City in pursuit of more robust public services for Izzy and her family. My next guest is Laura Nitihara. Laura is the mother of a wonderful little boy who was diagnosed at birth with late onset Krabbe disease. She's become involved in the rare disease community at any opportunity that arises. She is the proud creator of Quinton's Quest for a Cure, a family advised fund through Krabbe Connect. Professionally, Laura practices as a family nurse practitioner in the palliative care field. As a clinician at dealing with patients who are experiencing loss, she can relate on a very personal level. So I want to welcome you both. Hi, Laura. Hi, Julie.
Hi.
You guys ready?
Hey there.
Come on, guys.
Ready.
Let's
go.
Conversation. Right? Okay.
Ready.
Right, you're ready. So grief is this incredibly, I think, big concept that all of us know, and maybe we think we know, but it has so many different variations and permutations. And I think that most people think about grief in terms of, the actual death of someone you love. But in fact, what we'll be talking about is these other forms of grief before the actual loss, ambiguous grief, as Julie calls it, or anticipatory grief. So to get started, I wanted Julie and Laura to offer their definitions of what anticipatory grief is. And who wants to go first? Laura, do you want to go first?
Sure. I think for me, given that Quinn has late onset, it's the anticipation of the losses I will experience. I have not had to grieve actual losses yet, in the very literal sense, but I certainly anticipate what is to come, and so for me, it's just the waiting.
And so, Laura, do you mind explaining to folks who may not know about Krabbe disease and your unique diagnostic journey, which I think is very distinctive, and I think we'll contextualize what we mean by anticipatory grief?
Sure. So Krabbe disease, in a very, very tiny little nutshell, is a progressive neurologic disorder that affects the white matter, the myelin, in the brain. Most children are diagnosed based on symptoms and generally have a life expectancy of 2 years. My situation is different, or my son's, I should say, is different because he was picked up on a newborn screening test and has a late onset version. He has no symptoms yet. He is almost 3. And so we are in a waiting pattern, watching him for signs and symptoms of Krabbe disease onset. And so that's where I say I am waiting for that moment of loss and a whole different type of grief.
And so, Julie, you too, I think, you're both beneficiaries, and I use that word kind of in quotes. You're both beneficiaries of these new diagnostic tools that have made early diagnosis for these conditions possible, but it's left you in this limbo that you talk about as ambiguous grief. Could you talk about your family and how you experience anticipatory grief, or even introduce us to your notion of ambiguous grief?
Yeah, I mean, I think before my daughter Izzy was diagnosed in 2018, when she was about 9 months old, I thought of grief in general in a way more simple way, right? Right? Like I thought of it as the loss of something or somebody. And after she was diagnosed and I was just dealing with the shock of her diagnosis and the uncertainty of it, I was pretty sure that what I was experiencing and feeling was a form of grief, but I was confused, right? Because she was very much alive and very much stable in her health and happy. And so, but yet I felt a loss. And so, on a podcast, I heard this idea of ambiguous grief, and it's similar to um, Laura's own concept of anticipatory grief. I also think of it as what I will lose. But I think of it in terms of like what was really surprising to me was that the loss of an idea or an expectation about Izzy's life, about my daughter's life, about my role as her mother, about my family's life, that was as disorienting and as powerful as I imagine, a really significant loss of somebody would be. And so that startled me, quite frankly, and surprised me. But when I started thinking about the notion of ambiguous grief and the power of ideas and visions that we hold for ourselves and for our children, it made a lot of sense.
No, I think it's a really powerful concept that I think is going to be really useful as we the irony or the paradox of getting these new powerful diagnostic tools to with whole exome sequencing, that we're going to find answers, but these answers will create new ambiguity, new uncertainty, new challenges. And I think in my work as an advocate, I always tell newly diagnosed families that the diagnosis is the hardest part of the journey. By the time you're facing the end of life, I think that families have kind of steeled themselves. They sort of conditioned themselves and prepared themselves. Maybe Laura can talk about that, but that initial diagnosis, that initial news that you have a life-limiting, medically complex, uncertain, future for your child, where their premature death is quite possible, leaves you in this really remarkable state of. I think of anticipatory grief as grief in 3 time zones. You're mourning your past. You're mourning the life you used to have that you sort of sweetly long to return to. You're sort of trapped in this present where you're scrambling to make sense of this terrible news, and you're looking to the future with kind of and with terror. But by the time you lose a child, the trauma of death is, of course, profound and just all encompassing, but not nearly. There's a clearer path. There are rituals and expectations, but without the rituals and guideposts for managing it, it is this ambiguity and uncertainty brings its own challenges. So how would you, I love to ask people this question, people who've been on this journey with us. Could you both, Laura and Julie, tell me the best piece of advice anyone gave you? Laura, you want to start?
Sure. I think, and I'm a clinician, like I said, so I deal with diagnoses all the time. But I think being labeled as rare, um, knowing that the rare world is really big, and you're not alone, and so the advice of making sure that making your rare known is okay and leaning on other people that have a totally different story than you is still appropriate. You don't have to find somebody that falls in your exact lane, in your exact category, and reaching out to other people who also feel alone because they've been labeled as this rare family. So just finding a community.
Mm-hmm. Julie, what's the best piece of advice you got?
I struggled with this one. Recently, actually very recently, my daughter is now almost 4. And very recently, a friend's husband said to me, it's not advice per se, but he said to me, um, it's really amazing to me how complete Izzy is, given how much genetic material she's missing. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, she's missing 130 genes and over 10 million base pairs of DNA. And I loved that he said that he had the sort of presence and courage to say that. It felt extremely honest to me. And after 3 years of having this feeling like people are walking on pins and needles around you, and are so afraid to say something wrong or even ask a quote bad question. There are no bad questions, right? I wish there were more questions, in fact, and less assumptions and fewer assumptions. I don't know. I just really appreciated the like candor of his statement. It also so happened, as it happened, that I feel exactly the same way. So I think there was a lot of empathy also in what he said. But the tables turned, I think, when other people, close friends or family members, have experienced loss or are going through something really difficult in their lives. I can relate to that feeling of being on pins and needles, right? And not quite knowing what to say. And I don't know, I just really appreciated how he pushed through that, and was able to show a lot of presence and empathy.
How do you think people who are looking at our lives as families facing these very challenging diagnoses, how do you think, what kind of advice would you give someone who wants to help but doesn't know what to say? I'm going to throw this at Laura.
I think if they're looking for something to say, it's really just responses to allowing me to kind of open up. And so, like Julie has said, there's really not a wrong response. I really enjoy a listening ear. It feels therapeutic for me to talk about what's going on in my life. As far as actually like more of like the literal, what can they do? We did start that fund because of everyone asking us, what can we do? And so for me, it was, and the easy answer was to say, we're raising awareness, we're raising money. This is Quentin's Quest for a Cure. So it was a way for me to put a more literal spin on somebody just saying, what can I do? How can I help? How can I respond to the pain that you're experiencing?
And Julie, what would you add to that?
I mean, I think there are a couple things. I think in general, more questions and fewer assumptions. It's like, I understand that Izzy's syndrome is very rare. I don't expect, I know a lot about it now, but in the beginning I didn't. And I expect there to be a lot of questions. And so I always appreciate any question. And I think that there's something else which is more general about kind of considering the context, right? Or the moment in which you're going to say or ask something. I have an older son who's he's now in second grade, but when that year Izzy was diagnosed, he was starting kindergarten. And so we were starting the ritual of school pickups and drop-offs. And I really didn't appreciate in that kind of quick passing context, heavy questions or questions, vague questions. Like that wasn't the right time or place, right, for me to engage in kind of long or deep conversations. And I also didn't want to give flip answers to complicated inquiries. So, I think people have a burning desire to know and to want to help, but I do think exercising kind of some self-awareness, and when to ask those questions or when to offer the help or how to offer the help is really key.
And I really like Laura's idea about the kind of creating a fund or creating a GoFundMe page that people can, when people ask, what can I do to help, you have a place to point them to.
Yeah.
I always tell newly diagnosed families, put all those people who want to help to work, have them start raising money. Money is always useful, and you can create a charitable trust, or you can use it to remodel your bathroom or take a trip. Or actually, I tell families to buy RVs because it's so nice to travel and have the means to travel. So I love the idea of giving people a literal way to invest in your family and support your family. Mm. So the next question, which I love to ask, so what are the worst things people have ever said? They're just like, don't say this, please. Who wants to go first? Julie?
I have two categories. One category is like kind of implying or insinuating that the rare disease or condition or medical complexity is the mother's fault. So I got some questions, believe it. Yeah, I saw your eyes, Laura. I got some questions, believe it or not.
Like what?
In 2021, sorry, some of these were in the 2018, 2019, 2020. But recent questions along the lines of like, did you smoke pot while you were pregnant? Did you have an amniocentesis? Have you seen studies about the link between stress and genetic abnormalities? Then the other category of question is like just things neurologists say.
Well, yeah, we can have a whole discussion about neurologists. We were talking about that before.
So some things that have come out of various neurologists' mouths. She doesn't look like you, which is actually, that came out in the conversation leading to her actual diagnosis. And anyway, she doesn't look like you. And then there's this other thing of, all you can do is take this day by day. I really, really resented that one because not only is it cliche and trite and kind of empty, it's, I felt like somebody saying that to me was them like robbing me of this right to have a vision for my daughter's life. Like that is just a part of being a parent. Like what parent doesn't envision their child in a year, 10 years, 20 years, and I feel like that is a fundamental part of and a fundamental right of parenthood. And I was going to do everything in my power to retain that, right? Sure, we would be dealing with difficult situations. Sure, we would be dealing with, the complexities of raising a severely disabled child. But I felt I wanted to maintain and build a new vision for her and for our life as a family. And I wasn't going to just kind of, I don't know, be relegated to some sad sphere of life.
Laura, what do you think?
I think for me, again, it's kind of isolated in my unique situation, waiting for Quinn's diagnosis to really kick in. I think that people telling me how lucky I am.
No.
Gets old. And I'm guilty of it too.
Was that other patient families who had?
Not even. I mean, it's physicians. It's anybody that's trying to help me see a bigger picture that there is potential for advancements in medicine, which I am not blind to, and I'm incredibly grateful for, but I'm not lucky. So it's a little frustrating, and I'm guilty of it too, because I do it to help other people get out of an uncomfortable situation when they're talking to me. So I'll say, "But we're really blessed." I know it, so I'll kind of downplay my own feelings on it, and so I have to work on that myself because I don't want other people to do it to me. So being labeled lucky in this situation is a little frustrating.
I think that's such an important thing to talk about, especially with advances in newborn screening. I mean, those of us who did not have newborn screening, I think the story we like to tell each other ourselves is, oh, newborn screening is going to be this magic solution, and everything's going to be, rainbows and unicorns. And in fact, early diagnosis brings its own challenges and own, your own struggles that are parallel and distinct from non-newborn screening families. So I think it's so important for that perspective to get out there, because I think there is a widespread assumption, certainly in public policy circles, from advocates, that newborn screening is this wonderful thing. And I think one of the most important things, Laura, you talk about is that newborn screening is not easy. It is not a clear-cut answer, especially when you're in this, kind of in-between space.
And it's not to say that I'm not appreciative of it, because it's so important, and I am grateful for his diagnosis, or at least knowing about it.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't change the way I'm finding out about his diagnosis. I just, I can't be grateful that he has it, so I can't consider myself lucky.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think that's so beautifully said. There's a book by a sociologist who recently passed away, Charles Bosque, and he did a study of geneticists and genetic counselors, and how they talk to families about the dreaded VUS, variants of unknown significance. And there was a geneticist who described this as God's mistakes. And so as parents of children who have benefited, again, I put that word in quotes, benefited from the progress in genetic testing, what are your thoughts on inhabiting this kind of borderland in terms of unknowns and a diagnosis?
In my situation, I think this is where people call me lucky. I'm in a place where, because of newborn screening, I know what I'm facing, or what my son is facing, and I can stay on top of the most recent research. I can involve him in anything and everything that will give him the best outcome that exists right now. And so for that, I'm very grateful. It comes with that flip side of living every day knowing there's a dark cloud waiting.
Julie?
I mean, I think I just have this feeling of frustration. The uncertainty. There are a wide range of medical complexities that can come with Izzy's genetic deletion or not. And just because she doesn't have them now doesn't mean she won't ever have them. It just seems an infinite range of possibilities. Her lifespan, I don't know whether the size of her deletion corresponds to certain abilities and disabilities. I don't know. Nobody knows. And so I feel like what's futile, I guess, is, or not the most productive thing to do, is to search for certainty. I think the approach that I have taken is just to live with the uncertainty and to accept that, right, into almost every aspect of my life, big and small.
My next question, injecting myself a little bit, I have been living with a terminally ill child diagnosis since 2012. And once you sort of absorb what that means, there is this clarity in knowing what is coming. I mean, I don't know how it will happen or when, but I know it's coming. It seems to me that hope is actually a double-edged sword, that it is a gift, but also potentially a broken promise. How do you both view hope? And I'm going to ask Laura this question first.
I haven't really experienced the double-edged sword, if I'm honest, so far, which I am grateful for. I think so far, in Quinn's 3 years of life, everything has advanced to our benefit. And so it's easy for us to stay hopeful right now because we haven't had to experience the onset of his illness yet. And we have, so far, every reason to believe that things are moving the way we want, and we have been gifted time. And so for me, hope is kind of the only thing, and it's really been the positive light for me.
Julie?
I just have such a tortured relationship with hope. Like, I feel like hope got me into the mess of my extreme and disorienting, destabilizing grief after Izzy's diagnosis. Like, it just, I understand hope as a feeling and a sense of optimism that parents in our position or caregivers in our position really want to cling on to. But I caution myself against believing in hope because, like, I think what I want to do, and I think if there's any gift that Izzy's diagnosis has given me, it's been the ability to see and accept reality. And I hope is kind of like a will to me is like kind of some willful denial, right, of reality. And I feel very committed to not deluding myself anymore and just being okay with what is, right? And I've worked really hard at developing that ability to see things clearly and to accept things as they are. And I just feel like, hope for me is, from my perspective, it's almost self-protective in a way for me not to want to hope too much because I don't want to like increase pain, right? I don't want to develop like all of these expectations and desires that will not pan out. And I think it's also for me, I mean, that's, I think, quite sad and cynical, but I do think there's also a strength in this, in sort of eschewing hope for more clarity, in that I think I'm able to accept reality, accept many realities for what they are and not be so fearful of them. And I've surprised myself in that way quite a bit. I just remember back, like when I was in the corporate world many years ago, there was like a training, a corporate training that everybody had to go through. And the person leading the training, she got up there and she was like, hope is not a strategy. Stop hoping. And she was saying this in relationship to like when you're trying to get things done at work and you're trying to get teams to get along, stop hoping that they do it. Like come up with the actual ways and the tactics. Schedule the conversations on your calendar. Like that is a way to move forward. Don't sit at your desk and hope that it will happen. And it was such a different context, and it's such a glib statement in a way. But I have to admit, I've thought of it quite a bit since Izzy's diagnosis. This idea that hope is not a strategy. It might be a natural inclination, but it's not really a strategy for coping or moving forward.
So my next question is that, I've written obviously a whole book about grief. It is a fascinating concept to me. And when I talk about it, it seems to me, looking back on especially the grief of diagnosis, that it made you feel like you were dying. But then you realize you're not dying. You sort of wake up one day and you realize you're not dying, that it's this metamorphosis, and that this old person you were ceases to exist and you become this new version of yourself. What do you and Laura think of that idea? Then I'm going to ask Julie. Turn the question to Julie.
Yeah, I think myself as a parent changed completely with Quinn's diagnosis, and not in a sense that people tell me like you're so strong, but more of like how I parent. I think that I would have been the kind of mom that's pretty laid back and pretty comfortable with my kid running around and falling down and things happening, and he's a boy and that's going to happen. And now there's a new sense of paranoia that I don't think ever would have existed. And so it's one of the things I grieve, kind of who I was as a mom for the first couple of weeks of his life before I got that newborn screening, and who I am as a mom now. And I'm now the kind of mom that's asking people, do you think he looks like he's blinking too much? Or did that look like, and I'm noticing things that would never have even crossed my mind. And luckily so far have been nothing, but I'm a lot more heightened, and I'm a lot more of a worrier than I ever thought I would be. So I'm just a very different parent than I thought I would be. And I wonder if that will be the case with all my kids, or if that will be isolated to Quentin. I don't know. And so I think that's kind of the change I find in myself ever since his diagnosis.
Julie, what do you think?
I mean, Izzy's diagnosis definitely like sort of split my life in two. There was like everything, in terms of my identity, certainly, but there was everything that happened before that phone call, and then everything that has happened since. It was very much an event. I remember every word of the call. I remember when I think about the before period, everything that happened before, and who I was before, I see more of a misalignment, let's just say, in like who I wanted to be in the world and how and what I was doing, and that what I was doing as a in my career, how I was parenting my son, how I was thinking about the trajectory of my life and my family's life. Like, I would just say I was going through the motions more.
Mm-hmm.
And then after, obviously, I don't mean to imply that everything became aligned and therefore rosy, because that is not what I'm trying to say here. But there is very much an alignment, because there has to be an alignment. I think the demands of caring for a medically complex and a disabled child are, they're significant. And so there's always an alignment between how I'm spending my time and what is the most important thing I should be doing. And I would say more generally, like, my purpose in the world and as a mother is a lot clearer.
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
absolutely. No, that sounds so true to me. So, Laura, you come from the palliative care world. You are a palliative care family nurse, you're a practitioner. How did your clinical training and your work in this space prepare you for being on the other side of this?
It's actually the opposite. I got my role as a palliative care nurse practitioner after Quentin was born.
Oh,
And
did
so
you? Oh, so
I did.
oh, I'm sorry. So how did
Don't be sorry. No, and you know what? To answer your question as frankly as possible, I don't know. I don't know how much it affects my work, because most of my patients are in a very different situation. They're at an elderly age. They have chronic illnesses that have slowly progressed. They're things that are very well understood for the most part, while still not something you're excited to be diagnosed with. A lot of slow progressive illnesses is kind of my field. So its effect on me, I don't know. I think that my ability to understand that loss can happen slowly, quickly, kind of that feeling and that emotions roller coaster. That's where I think that it kind of helps me at home and helps me at work.
So, Julie, speaking about kind of the connection between what you do and your personal life, so as a writer, how did you come to view writing about grief? What was your process?
Well, in the early days after Aziz's diagnosis, I wrote to merely understand like what was going on. I couldn't see myself or our situation objectively at all. I just needed, it was a strange way of me distancing myself, almost as if I were like describing somebody else, was how
Mm,
I wrote those early pieces. And it was it was really just an impulse I had where it was like, I don't know what is going on. I feel so destabilized and so disoriented. I feel like I'm living in this sphere that is apart from normal life, whatever normal life is. Like I felt like I was in a bubble and I could see everybody, just going about their lives and going grocery shopping and taking their kids to swim lessons. And I was just like, I could see it all happening, but I wasn't in that world. Um, Susan Sontag has like a concept of the kingdom of the sick and the kingdom of the well. And for this time, and it was temporary, eventually I did feel reintegrated after several months, right, into the rest of the world. But I felt like for several months I was living apart from the rest of the world. So the early writing was really to understand, right? And I was almost describing my situation to myself. And the act of writing itself was a time for me to dwell and to organize my thoughts and my feelings in a way that I found very difficult, um, whether I was sort of in the throes of bringing Izzy to appointments or caring for her or worrying about something, whether that's like our finances or where and if she's ever going to go to school, all that stuff. So I made the space. It wasn't given to me. I made the space to write, and it was extremely beneficial. I think the other thing I'll say about writing is that after I published my first couple of essays, I started hearing from so many people and parents and caregivers who were like, I didn't even know I felt the way I did until I read your piece or your essay. And that just propelled me forward in a really incredible way because I um, just had this really strong talk about purpose, but I just had this like very strong feeling that what I was doing was being of service to other people and especially to other parents and mothers in my position. And I was really energized by that. Um, this feeling like there's somebody on the other end of the line who's listening and feels seen and has come upon a revelation or a deeper understanding of their relationship to their child through my writing. Like I was like, I am never not doing this.
hmm Yeah, it's amazing stuff.
Yeah.
It is an amazing feeling as a writer, such a gift. So, one of there's a program at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia that I support, which has been as a donor to the hospital, which is called Vital Talk, and the program is designed to train clinicians, in particular neurologists. There are two fellows from the neurology program who have been dispatched to this program to learn how to have challenging conversations with families. What would you guys tell them about how to do this? And I know that Julie was making some cracks about neurologists. We love them. We love you, neurologists. But sometimes they are just, it's a uniquely challenging field because there's a lot of bad news that you're giving out when you're seeing a neurologist and you're getting a diagnosis. It's often not something that's going to be treatable. So, what advice would you give those folks when they're talking to families like us? Do you want to go first, Laura?
Sure. Not to allow to pass the buck or to praise palliative care, but I think that if you aren't strong at that, it's sometimes just a matter of recognizing that you aren't strong at that part of giving the diagnosis, because it is a part of giving the diagnosis, is being able to explain prognosis and find a way to balance hope with reality. I think too often clinicians are uncomfortable with the discomfort that they're feeling back from a patient and family. And so then it becomes and trying to mask and fix and provide all the hope that can be given. And there's room for that too. But I think that if you can recognize that that's not your strong suit and have someone who is strong at that, whether it be palliative care or another neurologist in your, like whatever it might be, but just it's recognition, self-recognition, because I think that without understanding that you're missing that piece, you're not going to get better at it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it doesn't mean that you're bad or insufficient in your field. I mean, I think that part of a diagnosis, there are so many things that go into it, right? And in our situation, we had a very young neurologist at the start of his career take a look at Izzy and say, she has a chromosomal abnormality. And I think I know which one it was. Perhaps he shouldn't have been the one to also give us the diagnosis, right?
Exactly. There were two moments that I always think of with this issue was when I heard one day the students were following my attending around around the time Cal was diagnosed, and they were brand new residents and fellows. And I overheard one of the fellows say, "I didn't go to medical school to watch children die," and I was just like, well, what did you think was going to happen here working at a children's hospital? So it was so jarring to see this brilliant, young medical student or fellow, forget the fundamental part of their job. And on the flip side, one of my favorite neurologists, actually, one of the first things she does with newborn screening families like yours, Laura, is she just holds the baby for an hour. She's like, I just sit there. I don't tell them about the diagnosis or, the phenotype or MRIs. I just sit there and I hold the baby and I say, we're going to be in this for a very long time and together, and we need to get to know each other. And she just is really, which I thought was just such a brilliant kind of simple but powerful tool that would, get away from this kind of, pre-recorded medicine that I think, protecting your reliability or saying the perfect right thing or, whatever. Those are such great insights. Well, this has been an amazing. So let me start to kind of wrap up. So this has been an amazing conversation. I wish I could talk with you both for hours, but I'm going to wrap up now. And I think that I'll end with asking you both, what do you wish you would tell families who are just entering this world, just kind of struggling with this ambiguous grief or anticipatory grief, and what would you say to them?
That it's different for everybody, that there isn't necessarily a right answer, but to seek people who have been through it, writers like yourselves. Julie, I think that sounds incredible that people are reading your writing and finding that they're connecting so completely with it. And so seeking what's right for you and how you're going to cope, and that there isn't a right and a wrong.
Yeah, and I would just simply say it gets better. It gets easier. It really does. I did not believe people when they told me that. And the grief for me lifted. It took several months, but it did. And I'm in a much different and better place now.